Zalrith sat in the dimly lit war room of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The stars scattered across the dark expanse of space, like pinpricks of light in the void. The Tijoth Dominion had already conquered hundreds of world species, had fallen beneath their might, their fleets destroyed with ruthless efficiency, and now, as a high-ranking admiral in the Dominion, he was tasked with something new, something trivial. An order came down from the Council, a directive unlike any he had received before. The human species, the latest addition to the list of lesser species, now required his attention, but not in the way he had anticipated. Instead of observing their military might or their strategies against other species, Zalrith was ordered to study a single human child playing a Starship simulator, an odd request, one that made no sense to him at all. Surely the Council could not be serious. Zalrith shook his head and dismissed the thought as quickly as it appeared. He was a soldier and his duty was clear. No matter how beneath him the mission appeared, he would carry it out with the same dedication that had earned him his rank. He activated his command console and quickly accessed the transport coordinates. The instructions were simple. The human child was located in a small dwelling on the planet Earth, a relatively insignificant world in the galaxy, but it was home to this child. And that was enough for Zalrith to proceed. He would observe the child for a short time, make a report, and return to more important matters. His transport ship was unlike any human vessel, sleek and silent. It moved through the atmosphere without a sound, descending toward the small house designated on the star chart outside Earth's cities, and beyond the sprawling urban chaos. This human child lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind that felt peaceful, almost deceptively. So when the ship landed in a concealed location nearby, Zalrith immediately cloaked himself using advanced technology to blend into the surroundings. Not a single human would be aware of his presence, his ship invisible and his form undetectable. The house itself was unremarkable, small, simple, even quaint, the kind of structure Zalrith had seen on 1,000 primitive worlds, where the creatures lived in simple harmony, unaware of the vastness of the universe beyond their reach. He approached the window and peered inside. Where the child sat, the human was small, barely older than 9 years, yet their focus was intense. They sat before a screen, their fingers moving rapidly across a control panel, a Starship simulator game. The Admiral scoffed to himself, expecting little of interest. He had seen countless games in his time, and the strategies of lesser species always lacked complexity. But the human child was different. This child was playing with something far beyond the usual simple mechanics. It was clear that they were engaged deeply in the game, their attention fixed on the virtual ships on the screen, as though every movement, every decision mattered. Zalrith remained silent, and still his eyes narrowed as he watched the child, and for a fleeting moment, he felt an unfamiliar sensation. Something he couldn't quite place. Was it curiosity? He wondered how a child could possess such focus, such determination at such a young age. Surely this would be a short observation session, a mere exercise to fulfill his duty, and then he could move on. But as the minutes stretched into hours, and the child continued to play, Zalrith found himself intrigued. Perhaps there was more to this than he had first assumed. Perhaps the human species was not as insignificant as he had believed. Zalrith stood motionless in the shadows outside the window, his eyes never leaving the child. The small human's focus was absolute, a single-minded intensity that even the most seasoned warriors of the Tijoth Dominion would envy. The child's hands moved with surprising precision across the controls of the simulator, directing ships through complex maneuvers with ease. The game on the screen was a vast battlefield, hundreds of starships clashing in an intricate dance of fire and tactics, yet the child seemed to have no hesitation, no uncertainty in their movements. Every action was purposeful, deliberate. At first, Zalrith dismissed it as mere chance. Perhaps the child had stumbled upon some luck, or was simply playing a beginner's level. But as the game progressed, his certainty began to fade. The enemy fleet, far superior in numbers and technology, was systematically being outmaneuvered. The child was not just surviving, they were winning, and not in a way that was typical for a child. This wasn't blind luck or random button pressing. The movements were too calculated, too precise. Zalrith's gaze sharpened. He activated his translator and pulled up the simulator's data, analyzing the system's mechanics as the child played. The game was a tactical simulation, one that required the player to manage a fleet of starships, use resources wisely, and outthink the enemy. It seemed basic enough, a child's game. Yet as the child's fleet clashed with an overwhelming foe, Zalrith saw something startling. The child was using advanced strategies that most trained tacticians would recognize. The child deployed a smaller, faster group of ships to flank the enemy's rear, creating a diversion that forced the enemy to split their forces. As the main fleet advanced, the child ordered a quick retreat, drawing the pursuers into a narrow space between two asteroid fields. The child used the debris as cover, setting traps that turned the environment into a weapon. Zalrith blinked in disbelief. No human he had ever encountered thought in such complex ways, let alone a child. His initial amusement was replaced with a creeping unease. The Admiral, a master of military strategy, knew a battlefield when he saw one. He had studied countless tactical engagements, analyzed the outcomes of the most brutal wars in the galaxy. And this child was executing tactics that would challenge even the most seasoned veteran. As the game neared its climax, Zalrith's mind raced. The child was facing the superior enemy fleet, a force much more powerful than their own. The child's resources were running low, and yet the child remained calm, unshaken. They moved their fleet into position, prepared for the final confrontation. Every ship was accounted for, every maneuver meticulously planned. The enemy advanced, confident in their victory, but the child had a surprise in store. The simulation's final phase was a desperate, all-or-nothing battle. The child's ships made a final push, leading the enemy into a trap, an ambush. The child's tactical brilliance overwhelmed the AI's programmed response, and slowly, painfully, the enemy fleet was whittled down until only a handful remained. When the final enemy ship was destroyed, the child leaned back in their seat, their expression unreadable. There was no celebration, no signs of joy. They simply observed the screen, watching the battle's aftermath. Zalrith, still cloaked and hidden, felt a pang of confusion. The child was just a child, yet their mind was like that of a seasoned strategist. How was this possible? For a moment, Zalrith forgot about his mission. He wasn't an admiral anymore. He was simply an observer, captivated by the unfolding performance of the human child. The more he watched, the more questions filled his mind. Was this child an anomaly, or was there something more about humanity that he had missed? Something more than the brute force and rigidity he had come to associate with them. The child, having completed the simulation, stood and walked away, leaving the screen to fade into a soft glow. Zalrith lingered, still processing what he had just witnessed. He had been tasked to report, but now he was unsure what to think. Could this be the potential of an entire species? He had seen something truly remarkable today, and he wondered for the first time in his long career if perhaps the humans were more than just a fleeting distraction. Zalrith remained motionless, watching the child leave the room, his mind racing with thoughts that were unfamiliar to him. The intensity of what he had just witnessed gnawed at him. A child, barely old enough to understand the complexities of war, had just defeated an enemy fleet with a series of tactics that would challenge the brightest minds of the Tijoth Dominion. This wasn't a fluke, he realized. The child's brilliance was unmistakable. No ordinary human, no matter their age, could execute such intricate strategies by mere accident. As the child disappeared from view, Zalrith deactivated his cloaking field and silently stepped into the house, his footfalls muffled by his advanced stealth technology. The atmosphere was quiet, almost serene, a stark contrast to the chaotic virtual battleground he had just witnessed. The house was humble, filled with simple comforts, nothing like the sterile, utilitarian ships and stations of the Tizoth. Yet, despite its modest appearance, it seemed to reflect the child's character, a place of focus and calm, a sanctuary for the mind to grow unburdened by the distractions of the outside world. Zalrith scanned the room for more clues about the child. The walls were adorned with drawings, some crude but others startlingly detailed, depicting starships and battles. One particularly striking drawing caught his eye, an intricate schematic of a starship, drawn with a precision that matched the child's gameplay. There was no mistaking it. The child understood far more than just the game they had played. They understood the machinery of war. They understood strategy. The Admiral took a deep breath, focusing. He had come here to observe, to report back to the Council, yet he was no longer sure how to approach this mission. His initial assumption that humanity was a weak, fragmented species, unworthy of much attention, had already been proven wrong. He had watched a child outmaneuver an artificial intelligence that had been designed to challenge the most brilliant commanders. What could this mean for the rest of humanity? What if the rest of the species shared this hidden potential? He turned his attention back to the child's Starship simulator, still glowing faintly on the screen. The Admiral studied the interface, trying to understand how such a primitive species could create something so complex. The system appeared rudimentary by Tishoth standards, but it was clear that it forced players to think several steps ahead, requiring patience and creativity, traits that Tishoth valued but rarely exhibited in such a pure form. Thelrith had never seen a race so young demonstrate such mastery over something as intricate as tactical warfare. But it wasn't just the child's ability that fascinated him. It was the way the child played the game, as if they were not just trying to win, but to understand the very essence of conflict itself. Each decision the child made was thoughtful, precise, never rushed, always with a deeper purpose. They weren't just reacting to the game's challenges, they were controlling them, shaping the outcome through ingenuity and foresight. A species that could produce minds like this was not one to be underestimated. Thelrith glanced at the door as he heard soft footsteps approaching. The child had returned, this time holding a small book in their hands. They sat down at a nearby table, flipping through the pages with the same focused expression that Thelrith had seen during the game. It was a book of starship designs, perhaps another sketchbook or collection of technical blueprints. The Admiral's gaze lingered on the child, realizing that this was no ordinary human. This child was a prodigy. For the first time since his arrival, Thelrith felt a spark of uncertainty. How was he supposed to report back to the Tishoth Dominion about this? How could he explain the sheer potential he had witnessed in one human child? The implications were vast, and the Admiral couldn't help but wonder. If this was just a glimpse of what humanity was capable of, then perhaps it was time to reconsider the way the Dominion viewed them. Thelrith stepped back into the shadows, his thoughts swirling. He had been sent to observe, but now, for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what he had discovered. Thelrith silently retreated to the shadows, watching the child leaf through their book with a quiet intensity. The scene before him, the child's focused attention on the pages, felt almost surreal. In all his years of commanding fleets and engaging in galactic strategy, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The humans, from what he had known, were always a species defined by their brute force, their short-sightedness in the face of true tactical genius. But here, before him, was proof that perhaps he had underestimated them more than he ever thought possible. He glanced again at the drawings on the walls, particularly the one of the Starship schematic. The precision of it, the understanding of a ship's systems, this was far beyond a typical child's play. The human child was not only skilled in virtual warfare, but appeared to have a grasp on the very mechanics of spacefaring technology. The Tishoth had observed humans before, but never on this scale, never in such detail. They had always been written off as a species whose military endeavors were chaotic, based more on unrefined instinct than on cold, calculated strategy. As the child turned another page in their book, a soft hum broke the silence. Thelrith's attention snapped to the source. The Starship simulator, which had been idle for some time, suddenly powered up again. The child must have reactivated it, likely preparing for another round. Thelrith's curiosity piqued, and he moved to the console where the child had been playing, lingering at the edge of their vision. His sensors recorded the child's input, reading the commands as the simulation came to life. But this time, something was different. The difficulty setting on the simulator was set to Advanced, a level clearly designed for seasoned commanders. The game's eye opponent was overwhelming, its fleet massive and technologically superior in every way. Xal'Rith's mind clicked into gear. He knew this game well, having studied simulations like it in his youth. An AI fleet of this caliber would be difficult even for an experienced tactician to defeat. Yet, the child was undeterred. With a few swift keystrokes, they issued a series of commands, deploying their fleet in tight, efficient formations. Intelligent, almost instinctual movements that immediately made Xal'Rith's mind race. The child's fleet, small and underpowered, was no match for the AI's armada. But instead of retreating or falling into a defensive posture, the child pushed forward. Xal'Rith's hand twitched toward the console, wanting to pause the game to examine the child's decisions, but something stopped him. He had to witness this in real time, to see how far this human could push the limits of their strategy. The first few minutes of the battle were a brutal display of the AI's strength. The enemy ships moved with deadly precision, firing on all sides, picking off the human fleet one by one. But the child never wavered. Instead of panic or hasty moves, they calculated each move with an almost eerie calmness. The human fleet was deliberately scattered, making it difficult for the AI to focus fire on any one target. Then came the first surprise, a tactical maneuver that Xal'Rith would have never anticipated from someone so young. The child ordered a portion of their fleet to feign a retreat, drawing the AI into a false sense of confidence. Xal'Rith watched as the AI ships, believing they had cornered the child's forces, fell into the trap. The human fleet, which had appeared to be fleeing, suddenly turned back, forcing the AI's larger ships into an open field where they could be picked off one by one. Xal'Rith's breath caught. The child wasn't simply playing the game. They were outthinking the AI. What's more, they were using psychological tactics, exploiting the limitations of the simulation in ways no one had predicted. The AI, programmed to predict and counter enemy moves, was being caught off guard by the child's unpredictability. With each passing minute, Xal'Rith found himself more and more captivated by the child's play. It was clear now that this wasn't just a fluke. The child wasn't reacting to the game. They were controlling the narrative, outmaneuvering the system, and creating their own path to victory. The match stretched on, the human fleet slowly but surely chipping away at the much stronger enemy forces. It was a battle of intellect and patience, and the child's resolve never faltered. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last enemy ship was destroyed. The simulation ended, and the screen flashed with victory. The child didn't celebrate. They didn't jump up or shout in excitement. They simply stared at the screen, reflecting on their victory with the same quiet composure that they had shown throughout the game. Xal'Rith remained hidden in the shadows, his mind reeling. He had expected to witness a simple game, something beneath his station as a high-ranking admiral of the Tijoth Dominion. Instead, he had witnessed the mind of a strategist, the mind of a commander who, despite their youth, had just executed a level of warfare that many veteran leaders would be hard-pressed to match. The implications were staggering. If this was the potential of a single human child, what did that mean for humanity as a whole? Xal'Rith's mission had been to assess humanity's military capabilities, but what he had seen today was something far more dangerous, something more than sheer power or advanced technology. He had seen a glimpse of humanity's ability to think, adapt, and conquer through sheer ingenuity, and that was something the Tijoth Dominion had never fully accounted for. Xal'Rith stood in the shadows, the soft hum of the simulation's idle screen now the only sound filling the room. His mind raced as he processed what he had just witnessed. It was impossible to ignore the implications of what the human child had accomplished. The display of tactical brilliance was beyond what Xal'Rith had expected, far beyond what he had ever encountered in a species so young and seemingly primitive. The child had outwitted an enemy fleet with ease, using tactics that defied all logical expectations. The child had been calm, calculating, every move made with the precision of a veteran tactician, and Salrith realized with a growing sense of unease that this was no fluke. This was deliberate. This was a sign that humanity, for all their flaws, had something deeply dangerous within them. The capacity for innovation, for thinking in ways that even the Tishoth had not anticipated. The question now was whether this was an isolated incident or a widespread capability among humanity as a whole. Zalrith knew that the Tishoth Dominion relied heavily on overwhelming force, crushing any species that showed even a flicker of resistance. The Dominion's strategy was simple: dominate, subjugate, and suppress any threat before it could become serious. But humanity was different. They had not yet perfected the art of war in the way the Tishoth had, but what they lacked in physical might, they made up for in creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to take risks. These were not traits that could be easily subdued by force. The Admiral's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps once again. He turned to see the child approaching the simulator, their small hands moving instinctively toward the controls as if they were drawn to the challenge once again. Zalrith had observed for hours, but now he was gripped by a new question. How would the child react to a real challenge, one not bound by the rules of the game, but by the harsh realities of actual warfare? He observed as the child began a new session, this time upping the difficulty even further, pitting their fleet against an even stronger enemy. The same calm focus returned, the same deliberate approach. It was clear now that the child was not simply playing to pass time. They were practicing, honing skills that they instinctively understood. A 9-year-old, a child, and yet their mind worked like a seasoned strategist, effortlessly maneuvering their fleet with more skill than many commanders twice their age. Zalrith's brow furrowed as he continued to watch, his mind still grappling with the enormity of what he was seeing. Could the child be the product of some unusual training, some advanced human program designed to cultivate such talent? Or was this a natural inclination, an untapped potential that humanity as a whole might possess? As the game progressed, the child once again found themselves faced with insurmountable odds. The enemy was relentless, powerful, and well-equipped, yet the child seemed to embrace the challenge, pushing forward with a level of determination that reminded Salrith of the greatest warriors in his own species' history. The child's fleet took hits, lost ships, but never once did the human hesitate. It was as if they were willing to sacrifice everything in order to achieve victory, never once wavering in their pursuit of the impossible. Zalrith felt an unfamiliar stir in his chest, something between awe and apprehension. He had seen countless species, countless individuals, fall before the might of the Tishoth Dominion. But humanity, this small, seemingly insignificant species, was showing him a side of warfare he had not expected. They did not rely on brute strength. They relied on intellect, creativity, and the ability to adapt to any situation. It was a dangerous combination, and Salrith realized that humanity might not only survive in the galaxy, they could one day become a force capable of challenging the Dominion itself. The simulation reached its climax. The child's fleet, battered and nearly destroyed, managed to launch a final, calculated assault. With a brilliant feint, the child's remaining ships lured the enemy fleet into a trap, using the environment to their advantage. The maneuver was so precise, so unexpected, that the enemy had no choice but to retreat. Victory was once again achieved. Zalrith watched, dumbfounded. It was clear now that the child had not just won the game. They had outclassed the AI on every level. The child was not just a tactical genius. They had an innate understanding of warfare that surpassed even the most advanced algorithms. The child sat back in their chair, staring at the now empty screen, a quiet look of satisfaction on their face. It was not a look of childish joy or triumph. It was the calm expression of someone who knew they had just accomplished something great. As Salrith turned to leave, His mind was filled with a single thought. How many more like this were there? How many more humans, hidden away in the quiet corners of their world, possessed this kind of potential? The Dominion had underestimated humanity before, but he now realized that their greatest strength was not in their numbers or their technology, but in their minds. And that, Salrith knew, was a far more dangerous force than anything the Tijoth could ever hope to control. Talrith stood at the threshold of the house, his mind still swirling with the implications of what he had witnessed. The child had not only demonstrated an unparalleled tactical brilliance, but had also exhibited something more elusive, more dangerous, an adaptability and creativity that far exceeded anything he had seen in other species. Humanity, for all its flaws and perceived weaknesses, had something that made them far more formidable than they seemed at first glance. A spark, a hidden potential that could not be easily predicted or controlled. As he prepared to depart, Xalrith hesitated. He had been sent here on a mission to gather intelligence, to observe, and to report. His orders were clear, but what he had witnessed was anything but simple. How could he report this back to the Tijoth Dominion? How could he convey the depth of what he had just seen without alarming the Council? The Dominion relied on overwhelming strength, but this child's abilities, this species' potential, were far more subtle, more unpredictable. Xalrith had fought in countless battles across the galaxy, facing enemies with advanced weaponry and military strategies, but none of them had ever shown the kind of mind that this human child possessed. In a way, it was almost more dangerous than anything the Dominion had faced before. The human mind was capable of thinking beyond established rules, of creating strategies that defied conventional logic. It was the kind of brilliance that could evolve into something even more powerful with time, something the Tijoth could not simply crush with brute force. He turned back for a final glance at the child, who had now returned to their book, flipping through the pages of Starship designs with the same quiet focus. They seemed almost oblivious to the presence of a potential observer, a witness to their extraordinary abilities. To the child, this was just another day, another game, another challenge. Xalrith was struck by the thought that for this human, this kind of mental exercise was as natural as breathing. It was a level of engagement with the world around them that most beings in the galaxy never reached. And yet, Xalrith knew that this child was an exception. What of the rest of humanity? How many others like this child existed, hidden away in the far corners of their world, honing their minds in ways that no one, not even the Tijoth, could fully predict? If humanity had the potential to produce even a few of these individuals, the implications for the future of the galaxy were profound. The Admiral took a slow, deliberate step back. He had come to Earth to observe, but now he found himself reconsidering everything he knew about the human species. He had been sent to assess their military capabilities, but what he had found was far more unsettling than any fleet or weapon. He had discovered a species capable of thinking beyond the boundaries of conventional warfare, capable of shaping the very nature of conflict itself. This was not a species to be underestimated. With a final glance at the child, Xalrith activated his cloaking device and silently exited the house. He had his report to make, but the words seemed impossible to find. How could he explain this to the Dominion without invoking unnecessary panic? How could he convey that humanity, a species that had only recently begun to explore the stars, possessed the potential to challenge the very foundation of the galaxy's power structures? Talrith boarded his transport ship, cloaking it once more, and began his ascent into space. As he broke through Earth's atmosphere, his thoughts remained with the child, the strategies, the calm determination in their eyes. There was something about humanity, something deeply unsettling. Their unpredictability, their ability to think outside the box, was a weapon that no one could easily defeat. Back on the surface of Earth, in the quiet of their home, the child continued to study, unaware of the alien admiral's presence and the future he had just glimpsed. The stars above, vast and endless, held untold potential. And for the first time, Xalrith felt a deep sense of foreboding. The Dominion was strong, but it was not invincible, and humanity, with its brilliant minds and endless potential, was a force that could one day tip the balance of power in the galaxy. The thought lingered in Xalrith's mind as he made his way back into deep space. The galaxy would never be the same. As Xalrith's ship broke through the atmosphere and headed into the cold expanse of space, he could still feel the weight of the human child's presence in his mind. The images of their focused concentration, their tactical brilliance, and their calm, methodical approach to challenges played over and over in his mind like a persistent echo. He had witnessed something unprecedented, something that was not just a tactical maneuver in a simulation, but a glimpse into a deeper truth about humanity itself. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and think beyond the boundaries of known strategies was a force that no one, not even the T'Joth Dominion, could easily predict or counter. Xalrith opened a secure channel to his flagship, his home base in the depths of T'Joth-controlled space. As the transmission flickered to life, the cold, imposing face of the T'Joth Council appeared before him. Their dark, chitinous exoskeletons gleamed under the harsh artificial lighting, their glowing eyes fixated on him as they waited for his report. Admiral Xalrith, the chief counselor's voice echoed, low and steady. "We have been awaiting your findings. You were tasked with observing the humans. What have you learned?" Xalrith took a moment to compose himself, steadying his thoughts. The council would not take kindly to anything that deviated from their expectations. They wanted data, analysis, military weaknesses, things they could use to bolster their dominance. But what he had witnessed was not easily conveyed in dry reports and numbers. "Counselors," Xalrith began, his voice steady but laced with an unfamiliar tension. "The human species is not as insignificant as we initially believed. In fact, I have discovered something that may alter our approach entirely." A ripple of curiosity ran through the council as they leaned in, the light from their glowing eyes intensifying. "You will recall," Xalrith continued, "that I was ordered to observe a human child engaged in a Starship simulator. What I found was unprecedented. The child displayed strategic brilliance beyond any standard calculation. Their maneuvers in the game were not simply random movements or attempts at survival. They demonstrated foresight, creativity, and adaptability in a way that no species I have encountered could replicate." A murmur spread through the council, though none spoke. Xalrith continued, unwilling to back down from his findings. "The child was not merely playing a game," he said. "They were engaging in advanced warfare tactics, deploying strategies that many of our most skilled tacticians would struggle to anticipate. They utilized the environment, manipulated the eye's behavior, and ultimately defeated a far superior force. And this was a child, barely 9 years old." The council sat in stunned silence, processing his words. Xalrith could feel the weight of their scrutiny bearing down on him. They had expected reports on technology, resources, military weaknesses, but this was something entirely different. This was about potential. Potential in the form of a mind capable of shaping the very fabric of conflict itself. One of the council members, a tall figure with a jagged exoskeleton, spoke up. "You are suggesting that this human child is capable of tactical genius, that we are to treat humanity not as a primitive species, but as an emerging threat." Xalrith hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Not just one child. This is the potential I see in all of humanity. If this child can display such mastery at such a young age, what does that say about the species as a whole? Humanity may be a relatively young race, but their minds are capable of developing in ways we cannot predict. The child was able to think outside of conventional warfare strategies, adapting with a speed and precision that is rare, even among the most advanced species." The council exchanged glances, the weight of Xalrith's words settling heavily over them. "And how many others are like this child?" the counselor asked, the question dripping with suspicion. Xalrith took a deep breath. "I do not know, but I believe there are more." Humanity's potential is not just in their technology or their numbers. It is in their capacity for independent thought, for innovation in the face of overwhelming odds. We have underestimated them before, but this species is not one to be taken lightly. Another counselor, the most senior among them, finally spoke, his voice colder than the vacuum of space itself. "Are you suggesting we change our strategy, Admiral? That we treat humans as more than an inferior species to be subdued?" Zalorith's eyes met the counselor's, the weight of his gaze unflinching. "I am suggesting that we must be cautious. If humanity has the ability to think in ways that we have not anticipated, if they can outmaneuver and adapt as I have seen, then the Tijoth Dominion could face a challenge unlike any we have ever encountered." The silence that followed was deafening. The council members exchanged glances, their minds clearly at work, calculating the potential consequences of what Zalorith had presented. Finally, the chief counselor spoke again. "Very well, Admiral. We will take your report into consideration, but be clear, your mission is not complete. We will require further intelligence on humanity. Your task has not changed." Zalorith nodded. "Understood, counselors." The transmission flickered off, and Zalorith was left alone with his thoughts. He had delivered his findings, but he knew this was just the beginning. The Tijoth Dominion would not simply abandon their plans for humanity, even with the knowledge of this emerging threat. But now, more than ever, Zalorith realized that the galaxy was on the cusp of a new era, a time when humanity's mind, not their weapons, would be their greatest strength. And the Tijoth Dominion would have to adapt, or risk being overwhelmed by something they could not see coming. The game was no longer just a simulation. It was the beginning of a war for the future of the galaxy, and humanity had just made their first move. Zalorith sat alone in his darkened chamber aboard the flagship, his thoughts still churning. The council's words echoed in his mind, but their cold calculation did nothing to ease the weight of the discovery he had made. The Tijoth Dominion, so accustomed to commanding the galaxy with fear and overwhelming might, had never encountered anything quite like humanity. If Zalorith was right, and the more he thought about it, the more certain he became, humanity's true strength lay not in their technology, but in their minds. And it was a strength that the Tijoth were woefully unprepared to confront. The battle for dominance in the galaxy had always been about sheer power, weapons, fleets, technological advancement. The Tijoth had relied on these things, crushing weaker species with brute force. But humanity had something else. They had an almost instinctual capacity for strategy, for creative problem-solving in the face of adversity. The child he had observed was proof enough. A single mind, capable of orchestrating complex maneuvers and outthinking an AI that had been designed specifically to challenge the most brilliant tacticians. It wasn't just a game to the child. It was practice, a rehearsal for something bigger. Zalorith knew that the Tijoth could not afford to ignore this. If they underestimated humanity as they had done before, they could very well be caught off guard by the very species they had deemed insignificant. The Tijoth's way of thinking was linear, focused on domination and control, while humanity's strength lay in their ability to think outside the box, to improvise, and to adapt. That kind of thinking could change the course of any war. But what was Zalorith's place in this new reality? He was an admiral, a strategist, a soldier. He had spent his entire life dedicated to serving the Tijoth Dominion. But now, everything he had believed about strength, about victory, felt uncertain. He had seen what humans were capable of, and in that moment, he wasn't sure if the Tijoth could win this fight, or even if they should. He was jolted from his thoughts by the soft chime of his communication console. He hesitated, unsure whether to respond, but the growing pressure from the council weighed heavily on him. They would expect an update, more information, perhaps even a plan of action. He took a breath and activated the transmission. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of the chief counselor. The glow from the counselor's eyes was as cold and sharp as ever. Admiral Salarith. The counselor began, his voice devoid of warmth. We have reviewed your report, and while we acknowledge the potential of humanity, your suggestion has caused concern. The Dominion has never failed to subdue lesser species before, and we will not allow one to disrupt the established order. We expect you to return with a comprehensive strategy for dealing with humanity. Their innovation must be contained. Salarith's mind raced. The Council was steadfast, their primary concern always control. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't understand, was that humanity wasn't like the other species they had subdued. They weren't just a threat. They were a challenge that demanded more than just the usual tactics. He chose his words carefully, knowing the risk of questioning the Council's authority. Counselors, Salarith said, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. Humanity is not like any species we have encountered before. They possess an unpredictable genius, one that cannot be contained by traditional means. Their minds, especially the young, are capable of developing strategies that even our most advanced AI systems would struggle to counter. I urge caution. We may be facing a species that does not bend easily to domination. The Council's eyes narrowed, their collective gaze bearing down on him. Silence hung in the air like a weight. Finally, the Chief Counselor spoke again, his tone darker than before. You have been warned, Admiral. We do not tolerate weakness. Humanity's potential, however remarkable, will not prevent us from maintaining control. Proceed with your mission and report back with results. Salarith felt a chill as the transmission cut off. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The Council would not accept his warnings, and the weight of their commands was clear. The Dominion's arrogance would blind them to the truth until it was too late. The Tishoth had underestimated humanity once. They would do so again, and the consequences could be catastrophic. But Salarith also knew something else. The child, the first human he had observed, was only one example. There would be more. And while the Dominion was focused on brute force, humanity was focused on something far more dangerous, the ability to outthink and outmaneuver any foe, no matter their size or strength. Salarith closed his eyes, the weight of the future pressing on him. If the Tishoth Dominion refused to acknowledge this new reality, humanity would inevitably rise, not as another victim, but as a force that could reshape the galaxy. It was no longer about winning a battle. It was about a new kind of war, one where the mind, not the weapon, would be the ultimate weapon. And humanity had just proven they were ready for that fight.